Tonight, allegations of systemic racism and discrimination in the federal public service. Emotional testimonials.
It makes me feel upset. My last promotion, in essence, was 1974.
As Black public servants seek court clearance to sue the federal government.
To address loss of pension, loss of salary, pain and suffering.
Complications in the efforts to reach a ceasefire in Gaza.
Qatar is really just fed up with Hamas and Israel.
Qatar stalls its mediation efforts until both sides show a seriousness to resume talks. The tiny parasite posing a massive threat to Canada's oyster industry.
Obviously, the first reaction is disappointment.
Plus, the Atlantic artists making a major comeback.
Oh, guns blazing. Can't wait.
Sharing the storied past of one of Newfoundland's oldest traditions.
CTV National News with Heather Butts.
Good evening. We begin tonight with the disturbing details of a new internal report describing racism and harassment within some of the most senior ranks of the federal government. It comes as a historic hearing proposing a massive class action lawsuit is being played out in front of the courts. Thousands of Black federal workers who say they face discrimination while on the job are seeking billions of dollars in compensation. CTV's Kamal Karamali reports.
Stacks of papers showing Michael Turner's decades of work at Revenue Canada.
51 and a half years.
Wow. Seems like a long time.
It is a long time.
Retiring this year, and through that time, he says he received one promotion.
My last promotion, in essence, was 1974.
Did you ever train employees that ended up surpassing you?
Definitely. I trained supervisors.
Now a government-funded report released internally this week and shared with CTV News highlights systemic racism at the highest levels of the federal public service, patterns of anti-Black discrimination marked by differential treatment, abuse, cruelty, refusal, and subjugation.
Lack of representation have left many of us with scars.
Gerard Etienne, a former top executive, says he was let go after claims he didn't thoroughly investigate someone's complaint.
Never gave me a chance. It did not matter the evidence I provided to show how thoroughly the issue was investigated.
The report comes just as roughly 30,000 Black public servants are pushing to sue the federal government, alleging discrimination. A hearing at a federal court set to wrap up next week will decide whether they can go ahead with the historic class action lawsuit.
It has been filed against 99 departments across the federal public service,
seeking $2.5 billion in compensation.
To address loss of pension, loss of salary, pain and suffering.
Ottawa has admitted to racism within the federal public service, but says there are protocols for workplace complaints, meaning employees must use the established process instead of taking separate legal action. The court will now decide whether the class action lawsuit can move forward, with Black federal workers not only fighting for compensation, but mental health support and a robust diversity plan. Heather.
Kamal, thank you. President-elect Trump has accepted an invite from President Biden for an Oval Office meeting next week. The symbolic step in the transition of power set to take place Wednesday, the tradition between outgoing and incoming presidents returning to the White House. Trump did not host Biden after he lost the 2020 election.
I believe that we will win! I believe that we will win!
And just days after Trump's presidential win, protests broke out in parts of the U.S. In Washington, people rallied for women's reproductive rights.
I believe that it's true that Trump will approve an abortion ban for the entire United States. And I'm here to fight back against that.
In New York, protesters marched against potential mass deportations, voicing concerns about loss of rights for immigrants and other vulnerable groups. Iran is responding tonight to accusations it was behind an assassination plot against President-elect Trump. The U.S. Department of Justice alleges the plan focused on surveillance and ultimately assassinating Donald Trump. 2 Americans have been arrested and charged. 1 man remains at large and is believed to be in Iran. A spokesman for Iran's foreign ministry said the alleged plan is completely fabricated. A major setback today in the talks between Israel and Hamas. Qatar says it's stalling its mediation efforts towards a ceasefire deal, saying the 2 sides are no longer negotiating in good faith. CTV's Jeremy Sharon has more.
Good morning, sir.
Good to see you.
Very good to see you. How are you, my friend?
A major hit to ongoing diplomatic efforts toward a pause in fighting in the Middle East.
Qatar is really just fed up with both Hamas and Israel, that they're not coming to the table and having sincere talks about wanting to look for a ceasefire or some sort of resolution.
Qatar's foreign ministry says it will stall efforts to mediate between Hamas and Israel until both parties show their willingness and seriousness to end the war. Qatar, along with help from Egypt and the U.S., have played a key role in ceasefire negotiation attempts.
I think what it really is putting pressure on the United States. You remember, the United States holds many more cards than it's been willing to use with respect to this. It is the principal weapons supplier to Israel.
But there are questions about whether the U.S.'s approach to the Middle East could soon change.
We're going to see the Biden administration really put an emphasis on their diplomacy to try to get something done before the Trump administration gets in.
Trump promised to end the war in Gaza quickly and bring peace to the Middle East during the campaign. But he also has a history of strong support for Israel and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
I don't see anything on the horizon that suggests he's going to act any differently when he takes office in January.
Despite that, we're optimistic, says this Lebanese man, about a potential ceasefire under a Trump administration.
Qatar says it has notified all parties of its plan to stall mediation efforts. For now, Hamas has insisted any deal must lead to a permanent end to the war, a demand Benjamin Netanyahu has refused. Heather?
Thanks, Jeremy. A suicide bomber has claimed the lives of at least 26 people outside a train station in Pakistan. The attack happened as nearly 100 passengers were waiting along the platform. At least 60 people were injured, including civilians, soldiers, and members of the railway police. A separatist group has claimed responsibility for the attack. Thousands protested in Spain today, demanding the regional president in charge of an emergency flood response resign. Protesters clashed with riot police as officials were seen using batons and shields to de-escalate tensions. The regional leader is facing pressure to step down following a failed effort by his administration to issue timely emergency alerts to cell phones. The catastrophic flood has left at least 200 dead. The first human case of H5 avian influenza in Canada has been detected in British Columbia. Health officials say the person who tested positive is a teenager and they are being treated at the BC Children's Hospital. Officials say it's rare to detect bird flu in humans, which is why they're conducting a thorough investigation into the source of exposure. There are new concerns tonight over a disease that poses a threat to the maritime oyster industry. Months after it was first confirmed on Prince Edward Island, a possible spread to New Brunswick. It's harmless to people, but could be deadly for the shellfish. CTV's Sarah Plowman has more.
Wind whips across the strait between New Brunswick and PEI. These waters may face another force of nature, a deadly oyster disease known as MSX caused by a parasite. Officials say it was possibly detected in oysters in a cove near the bridge to PEI months after it was confirmed on the island.
I mean, obviously the first reaction is disappointment. We're expecting that it's just, a question of time before MSX was to be found sort of outside of the immediate area of PEI.
Found in Bedeck Bay on PEI this summer, it's now widespread across the island. Experts say it's harmless to people but lethal to oysters and at a high rate.
We haven't seen a lot of mortality, which is good. Next spring's going to really tell the tale.
It's unknown how the parasite spreads. MSX is a bit like a giant puzzle with a lot of missing pieces.
We increasingly need to imagine that this may have been something that became established quite some time ago, and that only now is kind of being expressed.
The disease can widely be found along the U.S. East Coast, where disease-resistant aquaculture lines have helped the industry adapt and now thrive.
That remains the foundation of the successful management of MSX disease in U.S. waters.
As New Brunswick's industry awaits answers, some are hopeful and note how the possible detection comes at the end of the season and in an area with few oyster farms.
Hopefully we do have a couple of months this winter to get prepared and sort of make what plans we can for next season.
The Canadian Food Inspection Agency has collected samples to officially confirm detection. It says while awaiting results, it is actively investigating and monitoring the situation. Sarah Plowman, CTV News, near Spence Cove, New Brunswick.
As questions loom over Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's leadership, there might not be a clear choice for who should replace him. Trudeau has made it clear he's not going anywhere. But as CTV's Colton Prell reports, a new poll shows Canadians aren't as firm on potential candidates.
Justin Trudeau has made it clear he's not going anywhere. But the Liberal leader's popularity problem remains, with his party well back in the polls.
Parties that are behind 16, 17 percentage points usually look for some sort of savior. The polling suggests there's no clear savior.
New polling for CTV News shows over a quarter of Canadians say there's no appealing candidate to lead the Liberal Party.
I don't know, but Trudeau.
Former Bank of Canada governor turned Liberal advisor Mark Carney polled the highest, but was picked by fewer than a fifth of respondents, still far ahead of both the Prime Minister and Finance Minister.
I think Mark Carney would be a good candidate. He brings an economic portfolio background that I think adds credibility.
A bevy of other cabinet members and former BC Premier Christy Clark failed to separate themselves from the pack.
I think Chrystia Freeland should be our leader.
Anyone who just has a good portfolio and can really talk to people, I think whoever can do that can do a fine job.
Among the Prime Minister's supporters, the U.S. election already playing a factor.
They've been able to negotiate effectively with that administration and have the experience.
Strategists say the polling shows new leadership may not turn the tides. It's about convincing voters the party can turn around the economy.
There's still nothing clear on the Liberal Party in terms of how they go forward, but I think what is clear is that they need to stick to that message of affordability to connect directly with people.
Part of sharpening that message could come in the form of a cabinet shuffle. One's been expected for weeks after 4 ministers announced they wouldn't be reoffering in the next election. Heather.
Colton Prale in Ottawa. Coming up, dangerous conditions south of the border.
They said that we have to leave because it's for our safety. It's getting too close to our house.
Extreme weather raging across the U.S. A brutal drought is fueling raging wildfires on the U.S. East Coast, forcing rare evacuations in Pennsylvania. An overnight inferno stretching almost 70 square kilometers transformed this vibrant fall scenery into a fiery landscape, prompting hundreds to flee their homes.
Trees and brush burning going up the hill rapidly.
At a park in Brooklyn, fire crews rushed to contain a brush fire prompted by powerful winds and dry vegetation, the smothering smoke covering the iconic New York City skyline. From fire to ice, an historic early fall snowstorm is slamming parts of the West, prompting an emergency across 2 states. A highway headache in Colorado, cars rescued after being stranded for hours in a blizzard.
This is a snowstorm that National Weather Service is calling historic. By the time this is all said and done, they're measuring it in feet.
In New Mexico, dicey conditions forcing highways to shut down, some areas blasted with a year's worth of snow. Breaking into a harsh housing market is a struggle for many Canadians. As politicians point fingers, there are calls for coordinated action across all levels of government. CTV's Kathy Lee takes a look at a proposal from Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre and if provinces would buy in.
New homes under $1 million.
Canadians who buy those homes won't have to pay the 5% federal sales tax if Pierre Poilievre becomes Prime Minister, saying Canadians could save up to $40,000 on the purchase of an $800,000 home.
But that's not directly going to the consumer, certainly not in the short term. You're not going to see a big check when you buy a house. It will have it'll meld into the market over a number of years.
The latest announcement, another pitch to address the country's housing crisis. Experts say happened because of factors such as low interest rates during the pandemic driving up home prices, supply chain challenges that followed, which raised home build costs, growth in population outpacing supply, and a subsequent increase in interest rates. The federal government already announced billions in spending commitments to address the problem.
Those supply side measures don't have an effect overnight. These take a long time to impact the market and to impact affordability.
To bolster the supply side, Poilievre says nixing the GST would lead to the construction of 30,000 new homes in Canada every year. In a letter, he calls on the premiers to match the federal tax cut. In Alberta, there isn't a provincial sales tax, but provinces that do have it, some already have a rebate program. The Saskatchewan government says 3,070 rebate applications have been processed and almost $20 million has been paid out. The New Brunswick Premier remains focused on removing the PST off multi-unit builds, and the Ontario government says it offers a rebate which is significantly higher than the current rebate offered by the federal government.
$24,000 is the rebate that a buyer in Ontario would be eligible for the first $350,000 of value.
To finance the federal sales tax cut, Poilievre said he'd cut federal programs, including the Housing Accelerator Fund, while provinces would have to find the savings themselves. Kathy Lee, CTV News, Calgary.
Still ahead, honoring fallen soldiers. Girl Guides and their annual act of remembrance. Tony Todd, the actor who starred in Candyman and many other films, has died.
Candyman, Candyman. Candyman.
Todd earned a Best Actor nomination at the 1992 Fangoria Chainsaw Awards for his role in the thriller classic Candyman. He was also recognized by the Horror magazine in 2017, earning a Lifetime Achievement Award. He was 69. As Remembrance Day nears, a number of communities across the country are holding ceremonial events this weekend. CTV's Kimberly Johnson visited some in the capital city.
A solemn moment, laying a poppy down at the grave of a soldier, gives 11-year-old Jessica a lot to think about.
It makes me think of what much they must have been through to fight for us and how much honor they have.
She's one of dozens of Girl Guides doing this act of remembrance, part of an initiative called No Stone Left Alone at the National Military Cemetery at Beechwood Cemetery. A campaign to make sure every grave here has a poppy on November 11th, honoring every veteran laid to rest.
And it's a way to remember the people that fought for us, for our freedom and for our life.
I don't know if they died from war or after war, but it doesn't matter as long as they participated and fought.
Girl Guides have a long history with the war efforts of the Second World War. Parents happy their children have a chance to reflect ahead of the day.
I found it really important to for the young to really understand all the sacrifice our previous generation have done for us for world peace.
Across town at the Aviation and Space Museum, many are learning about war efforts of a different kind.
It's interesting to think about being a spy. Well, that some people, that was their job.
Visitors can perform some spy work, cracking codes throughout the museum to learn about the work of two real-life Canadian spies during World War II. Interactive and family-friendly.
It gives you a story rather than just facts, and I think it's easier for kids to relate to that, to a person, to a story, rather than to numbers or abstract ideas.
And at the Canadian War Museum, its own programming for Remembrance Day weekend has life-size games of strategy like chess.
Checkmate.
as well as a chance to try on military gear, putting yourself in their helmets.
The helmet feels kind of heavy.
A trek the Statham family makes every year in an effort to remember.
It's just good for them to know the history of everything and, you know, what the troops have done and what they're going to do and why they've done it.
Kimberly Johnson, CTV News, Ottawa.
And please join us on Monday at 10 a.m. Eastern for our Remembrance Day special, airing on CTV, CTV News Channel, and ctvnews.ca. After the break, taking the stage. The cancer survivor keeping Newfoundland's folk culture in the spotlight. Storytellers across Newfoundland and Labrador have historically gathered to tell tales, bringing centuries past into the present. The Recitation is a proud part of that folk culture. Here's CTV's Garrett Barry on one artist who made a comeback of his own to keep the craft on center stage.
Who's inside the front door got blocked in the most?
One part poem, one part song, but never quite sung, more delivered.
Junk food campaigns.
The Newfoundland Recitation is a long tradition for as long as anybody can remember, with now only a few public keepers.
Not a commercial thing, something that you would do at parties or, it's not a money maker, I can attest to that.
It's a story of sorts, maybe about a current event like a killer snowstorm or a massive lottery, but probably a character's misfortune.
It wouldn't be like a tribute to a flower or something like that. It might be a person who likes the flowers so much, that he buys a house full of them and is allergic to, or whatever.
Often satirical, always funny, but never cruel, sort of like this storyteller himself.
He's kind-hearted, he's clever and witty and snappy and fast. But at the end of the day, it's always with a kindness that goes along with it.
On this morning, some last-minute practice. It's been more than a year since Penny performed to an audience.
All guns blazing. Can't wait.
He spent the last months recovering from cancer treatment for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
We played the gig on the 30th of August. And then 2 weeks after that, I was in the hospital, just bang, out ICU right off the bat.
But on this night, he takes the stage again, at a venue in downtown St. John's, a comeback. The pair are now firmly focused on the future, playing a few shows, making enough money, and keeping some folk history alive.
If Dave's name became a household name in Newfoundland, and I really, honestly, with my whole heart, believe that is almost criminal if it doesn't happen.
Garrett Barry, CTV News, St. John's.
That is our newscast for this Saturday night. I'm Heather Butts. For all of us at CTV National News, thank you for watching. Good night, and I'll see you again tomorrow.